Pieced together my family's secret past through DNA tests, learned who my father was, and confronted my mom's manipulative lies. I was always told by my mother, for as long as I can remember, that I didn't have a father. One of my earliest and most painful reminders came when I was in first grade. Every year, my school held a Donuts with Dad event around April, a simple morning gathering where kids got a free donut with their dads before school started. I remember walking into the cafeteria, seeing my classmates surrounded by their fathers, laughter and warmth filling the room. The scene struck me as so strange and foreign that I worked up the nerve to ask the lunch lady which dad was mine. I'll never forget the look on her face, so pained and conflicted, just before she quietly told me she couldn't help me with that, then handed me a donut and a chocolate milk. I didn't really understand her expression until I was much older. Every year after that, I went to Donuts with Dads alone, each time sitting with my donut, watching from the sidelines. I always felt like an oddity, an outsider, left trying to puzzle out the idea of what it was like to even have a dad present. As I got older, whenever people would ask about my father, it was just easier to say he was dead. No one pried, no one asked follow-ups. After a while, even I started to believe it myself. I didn't know his name, didn't have a picture, didn't have a story, so thinking of him as dead was easier than wrestling with the unknown. Whenever I asked relatives about him, I would get the same shrugs and apologies. I don't know, sorry. My grandparents would just say, she never told us anything. The line for father on my birth certificate was blank. Meanwhile, I had a half-brother who spent time with his dad, and I couldn't help but feel jealous that he had someone while I was stuck with a perpetual question mark. My mind spun countless scenarios for my conception: rape, incest, a one-night stand, maybe an abuser, filling in gaps that everyone else refused to address. For things to be kept this secret, I figured the reality had to be awful. Over time, those half-formed guesses seemed to stick, especially after seeing how my mother and her side of the family treated me. Mentally, emotionally, financially, it felt like I was always the black sheep, and while I can recall a few good moments, the bad outweighed them by far. Hoping for maybe some kind of miracle, I submitted a DNA sample to one of those ancestry services a few years ago. The thought of finding my dad lurked in the back of my mind, but deep down, I doubted it would ever happen. After a while, when nothing changed, no new results, no new connections, I stopped checking in, figuring it was a lost cause. Then, this morning, everything changed. I randomly checked my email and found a request for connection from the Ancestry Service. Not just one, two first cousins had gotten their results the day before and tried connecting with me overnight. I accepted, and almost immediately, it showed, they weren't from my mom's side, but my father's, sharing the same grandparents as me. Within minutes, my fiancé pieced together their profiles from Facebook, same area, matching birth year, same name. It was them, beyond any reasonable doubt. As we dug deeper, I think I even found my paternal grandmother. She had 4 kids, 2 sons, 2 daughters. The cousins were related to one of the aunts, so one of their uncles would have to be my father. Here's where it punched me in the gut. One uncle would have been only about 16 when I was conceived, and the other was an older, successful businessman, married at the time. Suddenly, it wasn't just about me. Reaching out could destroy lives, dredge up hidden secrets, or trigger pain for people I'd never even met. Even though I'm mostly estranged from my mother and her family, I couldn't ignore the impact my existence could have. I had so many questions, but for the first time, I wasn't sure I wanted the answers. The genie was out of the bottle, and it was too late to put it back in. My mom was 17 at the time I was conceived. After days of agonizing, I finally took the plunge and reached out to those cousins, possibly even siblings. To my shock, they responded. The first few messages were awkward as I tried to lay out my story, but once the words started flowing, they were unbelievably sweet, determined to help me find answers. That made me feel a powerful sense of belonging, rooted in a way I never expected. It warmed me to know these strangers cared so much about my story and wanted to help. We talked for hours, piecing together family bits and who could actually be my father. A surprising twist rattled us all. Our centimorgans were so high that the DNA service couldn't quite work out if we were first cousins or half-siblings. I'd be thrilled with either outcome, but honestly, the idea these wonderful people might be my half-sisters filled me with hope. Out of the 4 possible candidates for my father, 3 seemed plausible, but the 4th was pretty much a blank. On their mom's side, there were 2 brothers, one a little older, who my mom supposedly dated on and off before I was born, and his younger brother. Then there was their father, who complicated things further. Mutual Facebook friends revealed that my mom and their aunt had been best friends in high school, so their father had direct ties to my mom. The problem was, he was significantly older than my mom, and, at the time I was conceived, she would have been underage. The last possible candidate, all I had was a name, and apparently he lived in another state, making that seem almost impossible. Almost comically cruel, it turned out I shared loads of personality quirks with their dad, the one who always joked with his kids that they probably had a brother out there, thanks to his wild younger years. They always thought he was just exaggerating, but now the thought that it might have been the truth is deeply unsettling. Right now, we're figuring out what comes next. I don't want my mom or any of the potential fathers to know what I'm up to, not yet. After so many years of secrecy and half-truths, I want to find out on my own, not have it spilled by others in a panic. I still can't understand why my mom would hide this if it was the ex or his younger brother. My half-brother knows his own dad, who had his share of problems and jail time, but that was never hidden. Why would my own parentage be so taboo, except for the possibility that it was the older man? If he's the one, I suppose my mom kept it secret to avoid scandal or even jail time for him. But for now, the DNA can't confirm. They're going to try talking their brother into taking a DNA test that might clarify the half-sibling issue with shared Y chromosome markers. That'll take at least a month, if it even happens. In the meantime, I'm left bouncing these thoughts back and forth, grappling with questions bigger than myself. Some of these possible dads are married. Some have their own issues. Am I ready to complicate their lives with the revelation of my existence? How would I even do that without blowing up everything? I have more to process, more answers to chase, and more questions than ever. I never knew anything about my dad growing up. I had no idea what his name was, what he looked like, what he did for work, how old he was, literally nothing. Whenever I asked my family about him, I was always met with the same cold response: "You don't have a dad." There wasn't even a father figure in my life except for a small handful of teachers that went the extra mile for me. 7 years ago, searching for a piece of myself, I took a 23andMe DNA test. My hope was to uncover my heritage, and, if I were honest, I didn't really expect to connect with anyone on my father's side. But about 2 months ago everything changed. I found matches with 2 people who seemed very likely to be first cousins. We got in touch about a week after that initial spark, and together we started to dig. On both ends we pieced things together and soon found someone who was, by all evidence, my father. He has 3 kids, and I learned almost everything from his wife's open Facebook page. In less than an hour, I found all 3 potential siblings' pages. One of them actually lived on the same street I grew up on, which I discovered from a garage sale picture her husband had posted to Facebook. I sent out a friend request and a message, hoping for a connection or even just confirmation, but a week passed and I still hadn't been noticed or accepted. Confused and anxious, I talked to my coworkers, trying to brainstorm my next move. They shot down my idea of just showing up at their house, telling me it'd be creepy, I'd be blowing up both their lives and their fathers. The reality was, I only wanted the truth, a definitive answer and maybe some family health history. My wife and I are thinking of starting a family, and she has genetic issues in her lineage that we really can't afford to ignore. The prospect of a relationship with my biological father wasn't motivating me. It seemed more likely than not that he didn't even know about me. Before I set about meeting this man, I made a visit to my mom, the first in 20 years. We had a decent chat, old wounds aside, but at the end, I finally asked her to tell me anything about my biological father. She repeated the same empty line I'd heard all my life: "You don't have one." I pressed her, told her I'd already figured out who he was, and watched her freeze in shock. It turns out, things were far more complicated than I'd been told. She never thought my bio dad was my real father. She'd been sexually assaulted a few weeks before meeting him, and had always assumed that her attacker was my father. That explained everything: the way I felt like a black sheep, the distance and contempt for my family, the endless isolation. They all thought I was the product of a monster. My mother told me this revelation was actually a relief for her, but that it also brought tidal waves of guilt. If she'd known for sure, I could have had a father figure. My biological father, she said, had 4 kids and by all accounts was a great dad to every one of them. I thought about the stability I missed, and how maybe I wouldn't have struggled so much if I'd just had one person to count on. The last few days have been nothing short of exhausting, trying to wrap my head around all the what-ifs. Saturday, I got a text from my mom. She had more details about the sexual assault, and she didn't mean to keep my biological father from me. I didn't respond right away. I needed time to process, like I always do. This earned me a dozen more messages from her, all about how hard this was on her, how she was reaching out to people from that time for more info. Then, apparently, these third parties started contacting my biological father, who was apparently a private person already stressed by this mess. There were even rumors of a covert request for money, nothing confirmed, just whispers, but it was enough to make me uneasy. I finally replied to my mom's barrage, just a few minutes after her last text. She said she'd share more if I wanted it, and I agreed. Even if I didn't need more details, I figured it might help. She read the message but then ghosted me altogether. The reality hit me: she always has to be the center of attention, and when I don't give her what she wants, she lashes out or pulls away. I started realizing that my family might be looking for ways to villainize me all over again, just to avoid facing their guilt about how they treated me. Worst of all, my mother seemed to be sabotaging any potential relationship between me and my biological father, bombarding him with her people, maybe even money requests, dragging him into unnecessary drama. It hurts to think my own family could ruin this, like they have with so much else. I tried so hard to be respectful, to keep everyone who wasn't directly involved out of it. I thought if I took every possible precaution, things might be different just this once. I have to be honest, my mom is incredibly petty and controlling. I've witnessed and endured her manipulative games, the way she bends people and situations for her own benefit, or just to inject chaos into our lives. The possibility that she's lied about all of this, even the identity of my father, isn't lost on me. After all, she milked my sister's dad for everything in child support, why not pursue the same outcome with my father? Maybe her desire to control me was stronger. The facts are simple. My parents had a drunken one-night stand. My biological father didn't know I existed, and neither did my mother, really. We only met a few weeks ago, thanks to DNA testing, and since then he's been beating himself up over all the lost time. My mom was a narcissist, always keeping the truth from me. Now I know she landed in bed with a stranger while caught in an abusive relationship, and didn't want to admit it out of guilt. But a year ago, thanks to 23andMe, I learned the truth. Flash forward to today, I've been welcomed to family gatherings, dinners, and hangouts since the DNA test changed everything. Losing so many memories and the time I could have shared with them hurts, I can't pretend otherwise. But the answers and kindness I've received have been indescribable. I've never had a close family before, so I take it day by day, grateful for what I have now. At a recent gathering, talk turned to Christmas, and both my dad and stepmom invited me to celebrate the holiday with them and my siblings. It's hard to imagine anything better. I was absolutely over the moon, but the happiness wouldn't hold. The next day, one of my siblings called to say that maybe it wasn't such a good idea for me to join them this Christmas. My stepsister, E, the only one I haven't met so far, hasn't warmed up to any of this since day one. I never knew my father, not his name, not his face. Anytime I dared to ask my mother about him, her cold reply was always, "You don't have a dad." That was it, the end of discussion. My life was ruled by her and the line of partners and friends who came and went, all of them, alongside my mother's side of the family, took part in a steady stream of abuse and neglect that I had to survive. I won't spill every detail here, but I can say the cruelty was relentless, calculated, a daily campaign of emotional and physical isolation. Even something simple, like asking for dinner, could trigger a blow-up that lasted for hours. Yet, in the outside world, my mother wore her perfect mask. Caring. Generous. An image so polished that to anyone else, she was a paragon, incapable of cruelty. To this day, I can't fathom how she's able to dedicate that much attention and empathy to strangers, saving her real face only for those closest to her. Years of this taught me not to rely on anyone. I became hyper-independent, unable to lean on a soul, even when I desperately needed to. I went low contact with my mother years ago. She still keeps up appearances, sprinkled across her social media, posts of love and family, staged for a world that will never know what she did to me. A few months ago, everything shifted. I took one of those DNA tests, something I'd considered more out of curiosity than hope. To my utter shock, it led me not just to my biological father but an entire side of family I never knew existed. Suddenly, I had siblings, a stepmom, and more aunts and uncles than I could count. They welcomed me with open arms, something so alien I hardly knew how to react. These people sit down to dinners together, play games, plan celebrations just for the fun of it. They say "I love you" openly, without thinking, and it wrecks me every single time. I never heard those words growing up. I keep my own history to myself. When they ask, I brush it off. I don't want my pain to become their burden, to stain this rare sense of acceptance with the darkness I carry. I did confront my mother about my father. She spun some wild story about thinking my dad was someone else, someone abusive. But in my gut, I know she chose the path where I was hers alone. A life where she could keep total control. Sometimes I find myself sitting on the stairs at my dad's house, staring up at the family photos, his wife, my siblings. I imagine myself in those frames, and ache for the life that should have been mine. I keep replaying how different things would have been, how much less I would have suffered. It's a strange torment. I found what was missing my entire life, but the discovery has only made me angrier, more hollow than ever. It feels like my whole life was stolen from me. But that's not the only storm I'm weathering with this new family. There's E, my stepsister, who's become a force determined to keep me on the outside. She's insisted my dad run even more in-depth DNA testing before I'm allowed near the family or her kids, even though I've never met her, never interacted with her friends. She's been spreading this bizarre narrative that I'm some kind of threat, that I'm after money, that I'm mentally unstable. I have no police record, I have my own financial security. Her accusations are pure fiction. People tell me E acts holier than thou and struggles with her own issues, including bipolar disorder. Apparently, she's not just targeting me, she's been on the outs with the whole family after an altercation with my siblings that ended with police intervention about a month before I was discovered. Despite every invitation, E refuses to meet me. Not once has she come to a family gathering since all of this started, and now she's given an ultimatum. If Op is at Christmas, I and your grandkids won't be there, she told my stepmom, her mother. It kills me that my stepmom might have to miss seeing her grandchildren over a conflict I didn't choose. But I also don't want to cede all the power to E. Let her decide when and how I'm allowed to participate in family life, as if my presence is some shameful secret. Truthfully, I suspect she's using me as a scapegoat, avoiding family since her own issues landed her in the spotlight. And yet, I'm trapped by guilt. Am I the villain if I go to Christmas? If that wasn't complicated enough, I recently learned something that makes my head spin. My aunt, my mother's sister, has been retained by my stepmom for divorce proceedings with my biological father. To be clear, my dad never knew I existed, My mother kept this secret from him his whole life, and I found him, thanks to a public DNA service as an adult. Now my dad's furious, not just at my mom, but at my aunt, and this is likely why my stepmom chose her as a lawyer. I can't help but feel it's deeply unethical for my aunt to take the case, but my personal feelings don't matter under the law. The whole mess just feels wrong. I came looking for family and got far more: pain, resentment, impossible choices, and a reminder of everything I lost. Now I'm left wondering if I even have the right to show up, or if it would just make things worse for everyone. Christmas tried to force a choice out of me, and for the first time in my life, I made one that wasn't about survival, but about what kind of person I want to be. 2 days after my last post, my dad sent me a screenshot at 6:11 a.m., a new paternity test, not the mail-in kit but the kind with paperwork, lab techs, chain of custody, the whole deal. He'd done it behind my back to settle the noise. I didn't want you to have to ask, his text said. The result might as well have been written in fireworks: 999%. I stared at it under the harsh kitchen light and cried until my coffee went cold. Not because I doubted it, but because someone had finally done the thing people in my life never do: anticipate the harm and cut it off before it got to me. He sent the same screenshot to the family group chat. Within a minute, 3 little dots started and stopped under E's name. Then nothing. Then, an hour later, a paragraph in which she tried to make the results say anything else. Chain of custody can be faked. Labs can be wrong. We should wait for a third test. She peppered in words she must have picked up from some forum: confounders, anomalies, like if she sounded technical enough, she could push facts off a cliff. I told my dad I'd skip Christmas. I said it plainly. It wasn't a martyr act. It was just true that I couldn't bear the idea of my stepmom losing her grandchildren because of me. My dad didn't argue. He called and just breathed with me for a minute. Then we make our own day, he decided. Christmas Eve. After dinner. I'll cook. He does this when he's nervous, fills the silence with plans. It soothed me. 30 minutes later, a courier knocked on my door. He was older, wearing a Santa cap like he'd been ordered to by some corporate memo. In his hand was a manila envelope addressed to me. Inside, no card, was a subpoena with my name typed cleanly across the top. My aunt's law firm. It was a demand for my communications with my dad and for me to appear at a deposition about timeline and knowledge. My dad's divorce. I stood there on my rug like the floor had tilted. The courier cleared his throat and asked timidly, "You're her?" Like he wanted to make sure he wasn't delivering a grenade to the wrong person. My phone went off like a slot machine. My mother first. She always smells blood in the water before anyone else. "You don't have to respond to anything," she wrote. "They can't make you do anything." Then, like an afterthought, "This is what happens when you put yourself in the middle of other people's marriages." My aunt didn't text me. My stepmom did. She apologized in a way that sounded flat, like she was reading off a cue card inside her head. She said she hadn't meant for it to reach me directly, that her attorney took initiative. Then she asked me not to talk to my mother about it. The world folded in on itself for a second. It's nauseating how tightly these people are tied and how often they pretend not to know each other. I called a friend who'd been through a messy custody case and got the number of a lawyer who answered her own phone. I took the subpoena to her office and she flipped through it with a practiced hand. "They can ask," she told me, "and you can show up with counsel. You're not their pawn." She asked nothing about my family other than how to pronounce their names. I didn't realize how badly I needed someone to not be curious. We scheduled the date and I texted my dad that I'd handle it. He texted back one sentence: "I'm sorry she did that." No spin. No defense. The she could have been half a dozen people and that was accurate, too. Christmas Eve at my dad's was a small miracle disguised as an ordinary night. I got there early and hung around the kitchen island while he sautéed garlic. The house smelled like butter and pine. My siblings trickled in with cheap wine and bad jokes and a bag of rolls someone pretended they baked. My stepmom hugged me in the doorway and kept her hand on my arm a second longer than a polite hug requires. The look she gave me said everything her text didn't. My grandmother came last, leaning on a cane, her lipstick perfectly applied. We'd never met. She walked in, took one long look at my face, and her mouth fell open like she'd been winded. "Lord, you're him," she whispered. "Not you look like him. Not you must be him. You're him." She reached up and cupped my cheek with a hand that smelled like rose lotion and said, "I knew," in a way that told me she'd been carrying that knowing without proof for longer than was fair to ask. She didn't cry. I did. We ate too much. We played a game with a bell. Someone burned the crescent rolls. I went to refill my water and caught my reflection in the dark window over the kitchen sink. Me, in a house I should have known, knowing it for the first time. When we did gifts, my dad handed me a flat box wrapped in newspaper. Inside was a faded Polaroid in a cheap frame. It was him at 20, hair too long, an arm around a girl with dark bangs outside a bowling alley I recognized because the sign was still the same when I was a kid. My mother. On the back, written in teenage girl bubble letters, was the date. I tried to do the math in my head and failed, because sometimes your brain refuses to help you hurt it. "Your aunt's friend mailed it to me," my dad said quietly. "It came this morning. She said she found it in an old shoebox in her garage. I thought you should have it." That friend is the one who used to take me to the library in the summers when my mother had appointments. She'd looked me in the eye every time and said, "Ask your mother," whenever I asked about my father. I turned the photo over and over in my hands. My mother can say what she wants about what she thought and when. She posed for a picture with the man she insisted didn't exist. None of it makes the assault she described less vile. But I felt the ground under my feet shift, not into something solid, exactly, but into something more honest. At 8:22 p.m., E showed up without warning. We heard the knock and my dad went pale. She came in fast, the cold still clinging to her hair, and stopped dead when she saw me. For a second, she looked like a kid who ran headlong into a glass door. Then she squared her shoulders, like she'd practiced something in the car and now had to perform it. "I told you," she said to my dad, not taking her eyes off me. "If he's here, I'm not." Her voice wobbled on the last word. My dad didn't make a speech. He just shook his head. Not harsh, not triumphant. Final. My stepmom, God bless her, stepped forward and reached for her hand, but he pulled back like the touch burned and turned on her heel. At the threshold, she spun and hissed, "If you want to replace your family, that's your choice." It wasn't dramatic. It was sad. She left and the cold rushed in through the door she didn't bother to close. No one chased her. My grandmother muttered, "That girl needs to get right with herself," which was both unfair and more merciful than anything I've ever heard in my family. We finished dessert in a quiet that held, like a deep lake, and then my dad walked me to my car. On the porch, he told me he'd met with an estate lawyer that afternoon. He didn't dance around it. He wanted me to know that he was making things equal. "Not because of money," he said. "Because I refuse for you to be an asterisk." I told him I didn't want to be the lit match in his house. I told him I could be patient, that I could be small for a while if that's what kept the peace. He squeezed my shoulder. "I made you small without even knowing you," he said. "I'm not doing it now that I do." Yesterday morning, my aunt withdrew from my stepmom's case. I found out because my lawyer texted me a screenshot from the court portal like a millennial fairy godmother. There was no explanation, just the formal substitution of counsel and a timestamp. An hour later, my stepmom called me from her car. She was crying and trying not to. "I didn't know she served you," she said. "I told her I wanted to know when discovery would touch you and she." I don't know what she thought. Then she apologized again, differently this time, without the canned tone. She told me she can't untangle all the grudges in this town, but she can decide whether she adds to them. I told her I didn't hold any grudge against her. It felt like the kind of truce that might hold. My mother left me a voicemail last night, and I made the mistake of listening to it. She was furious about the picture. She called my aunt's friend a traitor and me a fool. Then her voice changed, deflated, and she said she hoped I wasn't letting them rewrite history. She cried into the phone for a while. I sat there on the edge of my bed, phone pressed to my ear, and felt nothing. Not rage. Not compassion. Just clean, quiet nothing where her voice used to live in my head. I didn't go to Christmas morning. E posted pictures of her kids in matching pajamas on social media and my stepmom heart reacted them. My dad sent me a photo later of the wrapping paper explosion and a plate of half-eaten cinnamon rolls. "We saved you too," he wrote. I went over in the afternoon. On the way, I stopped at a drugstore and bought frames. I put the Polaroid in one and hung it on the wall at the bottom of the stairs with the family photos. It's not a perfect fit. The frame is cheap and doesn't match. The date on the back is a little knife every time I see it. But when I sat on the stairs and looked up, I didn't feel like I was staring through glass anymore. I was in the frame, crooked and late in mine anyway. There's still a deposition on my calendar and a sister who looks at me like I'm a scam. There's a mother who will spin until she makes herself dizzy. There's a stepmom who is deciding who she is in all of this without my aunt whispering in her ear. There's a dad who cooked too much and sent me home with leftovers I ate cold from the container at midnight. The deposition happened on a Wednesday at 9 a.m. in a room that smelled like coffee that had died hours ago. My lawyer sat next to me with her yellow legal pad and a pen she clicked when I started to speed up. Across the table was my stepmom's new attorney, calm, hair in a tight bun, a neat stack of tabs like she was filing away a life, and a court reporter who coughed like she didn't want to be in the transcript. My dad wasn't in the room. He was in the hallway, because it wasn't his turn. They asked me to state my name, spell it, the road opening moves that feel like someone knocking on the door to your own mouth. Then the questions got surgical. When did you first reach out? Had anyone offered me money to keep quiet? Did I ever tell my father I wanted him to leave his wife? Did my mother ever say he knew? We took a break at 10:17 because the court reporter needed water, and when we came back the attorney slid a printout across the table, Facebook messages from an account I recognized as belonging to one of my mother's friends. "Is this you?" she asked, but it wasn't a trap. It was a rope. I read the messages. A lot of insinuation, a few greasy suggestions wrapped in concern. "We can make this easier for everyone. It would be better for him if he made a gesture." My name wasn't in them, not once, but my existence was implied like a stain someone pretended they couldn't see. My lawyer put her hand on the table like a calm-down palm. "He didn't solicit anything," she said, voice level. The other attorney didn't argue. She just watched me read and then took the papers back and put them under a blue tab. When it was done, The court reporter took her little machine apart like a bird folding into itself, and we all stood up at the same time and said, "Thank you," with different amounts of sincerity. In the hall, my dad was sitting on a bench under an exit sign with a styrofoam cup and that look he gets when he's working out how much to save before it hurts someone. He stood. He didn't ask how it went. He just handed me the cup. It was sweet coffee that tasted like high school teacher lounges and church basements. "I hate that you were in there," he said. I told him I hated it less than I hate not knowing. It was true and also an answer that ended the conversation neatly, which we both needed. He drove me to Vital Records after. He'd gotten an appointment and refused to tell me. The building was all tile and echoes, the kind of place that makes you lower your voice even when you're just commenting on the weather. The clerk was a woman with gray roots and a no-nonsense haircut who wore a sweater with sequin pine trees. She asked for our IDs, our paperwork, the lab result, the court order my lawyer had slid across the table at the end of the deposition with a tiny smile like ta-da. When she printed the form, my father's hand hovered over the line like it wasn't a pen he was holding but a match, like the moment he touched the paper it would burn and whatever we had would either survive the fire or it wouldn't. He signed his name, my name, his name, together on a government form that will get folded into a file and forgotten by everyone but us. The clerk slid me 2 certified copies in cardboard sleeves and said, not unkindly, "You'll want to keep this safe," like she knew it wasn't just paper but something rib deep. I walked out of that office feeling taller. Not better, necessarily. Just like the ground had given me another inch of itself. On the way home we hit a red light across from my old elementary school. There was a banner strung up on the chain link that said pastries with parents. In colored letters some exhausted PTO volunteer had cut out. The parking lot was full of minivans. I stared until the light turned green and then stayed red again because we hadn't moved. My dad flicked his eyes between me and the road and flicked his blinker like that would help. "Want to get a donut?" he asked, quiet, and there was no way for him to know what question he'd actually asked, but he did. We didn't go to the school. We went to a grocery store with a bakery case and bought a dozen all the same because deciding between sprinkles and glaze felt like a test I wasn't ready for. We sat on his truck's tailgate in the parking lot and ate in silence while people pushed carts past us with hams and paper plates. Sugar got on his jacket. A little wind cut under my coat and I felt 12 for a stupid second. He set a napkin in my lap like it was the first time in his life he'd had a lap to set one in. "I can't make up," he said. I nodded and kept chewing. "But I can make different." I nodded again. He handed me a second donut. We sat there until our fingers were sticky. He texted me that night at 12:03 a.m., like courage used to only come to her after midnight and she hadn't noticed yet that she was an adult who could make decisions at noon. It wasn't a paragraph. It was 3 sentences. "I don't trust you. I don't trust him. I'm trying to trust myself." I stared at it until the words started to look like shapes. I didn't respond. It wasn't that I didn't want to. It was that the only honest response I had was okay, and it looked rude and short in the chat box. 10 minutes later, her husband messaged me from his account asking if I could meet him at a park near the river on Saturday morning. He included a smiley face that made my skin crawl because it felt like a peace treaty written in crayon. I texted my dad instead. He told me not to go alone. I told him I'd bring my lawyer, which made him laugh into the phone like he couldn't help it. Saturday was brittle cold. The river had that dirty shine it gets when the sun's trying. E's husband was there already, hands jammed in his jacket, hair that said he'd put a cap on it and taken it off when he saw me. He didn't ask me how I was. He said, "She's unraveling," like I didn't know, like anyone who had ever been a child in a house with someone coming undone couldn't spot the weave. He said she'd started seeing a therapist and put herself back on her meds. He said he thought maybe this wasn't about me, or not only about me. He asked if I could give it time. I told him that's the only thing I'm good at, sitting with something that hurts and outlasting it. He looked relieved and guilty at the same time. He handed me a manila envelope. Inside was a drawing, a kid's crayon portrait of a house and a big stick figure and 2 little ones. On the big stick figure's shirt, in careful, backward letters, it said Dad. "She's mad at everybody," he said. "But she wants her kids to know their grandpa." He said that last word like it was the first time he'd tried it out in his mouth. My mother showed up at my door on Sunday afternoon wearing sunglasses and a coat that did not belong to the weather. She had a plastic bin in her arms, the kind people use for holiday decorations and keepsakes that outlive their meaning. She didn't try to push past me. She set the bin at my feet like she was delivering a lost dog. "I found these," she said. Her voice was hoarse from either crying or cigarettes. "They were tucked in the back of the closet. I don't want them." She meant that she couldn't carry them anymore or that she never could. I couldn't tell. I didn't invite her in. I didn't say I was sorry. I watched her walk back to her car in those ridiculous sunglasses and drive away too fast. Inside the bin was a tangle of old birthdays, wrapping paper scraps, programs from school plays, 2 hospital bracelets with my mother's name and a tiny plastic clip that looked like it belonged on a potato chip bag. One bracelet had my birth date. The other had the day before, like someone had printed it wrong and redid it. On the back of the wrong one, in faded pen, my mother's hand had written a name I knew as my father's last name and then scratched it out so hard the paper peeled. Underneath the scratch, barely there, the first letter still showed through. I sat on the floor with that little ugly band and felt my heart go quiet in my chest like the moment before a storm breaks. I took the bin to my dad's that evening. He didn't look at me, not at first. He lifted the bracelets out like he was afraid they'd crumble. He held the one with the scratched out name in his palm and didn't say anything for so long I thought maybe we were going to sit like that all night. When he did speak, he didn't talk about my mother. He said, "You were real. To someone." Even then. He put the bracelet down and rubbed his eyes and then did the thing he always does when he's overwhelmed. He asked if I wanted dinner. I said yes because the answer didn't change regardless. We went to the bowling alley from the Polaroid on Tuesday, because, why not Tuesday? The sign out front is still the same. "You're right," he said, "the blue neon are burned out so it reads Lane Bowl. Inside, it smells like rentable shoes and spilled beer." We didn't bowl. We stood in front of the sign and my brother, who had insisted on coming like we were doing something ceremonial and needed a witness, took a picture of us with my phone. Two men with winter cheeks and bad posture, squinting into January's thin light. I ordered a cheap print online that night and swung by the pharmacy to pick it up in an envelope that said, cheerfully, "Memories you can hold." I put it in a frame and hung it next to the Polaroid. Now when I sit on the stairs and look up, the then and the now talk to each other. The estate lawyer sent me a PDF on Wednesday, a scanned copy of a document with my name on a line under the words "issue of." My dad asked me to come when he signed it, but he didn't make a moment out of it. We did it like you do any paperwork you care about, careful, quiet, with the weight of it in the room. When it was done he handed me a photocopy and a key to a box at the bank. "In case something happens," he said, like he was announcing the weather. My stepmom invited me over on Friday morning while everyone else was at work. She made tea and then admitted she didn't know how to make tea the way I like it and let me do it myself. We sat at her kitchen table with the only plant in her house she hasn't killed. "I didn't hire your aunt to hurt you," she said. "I hired her to hurt him." She winced like she'd bitten down on a piece of metal. "Not physically," she added, like either of us needed that clarified. I told her I get it. She told me about the first time my dad forgot to come home for dinner, which had nothing to do with me and everything to do with the way people fall apart and then pretend they meant to. She didn't ask me to pick sides. She did ask me if I wanted to come to her book club on Monday because they were reading something she thought I'd hate, and she wanted an ally. I said sure. I can't remember the last time someone asked me to show up for something small. The court sent a notice today that my quality of witness was not required at trial after all. My deposition was enough unless either party pushed, and neither did. My lawyer emailed me a 3-sentence note that included a smiley face made out of a colon and a parenthesis like "we are all still on dial-up." I forwarded the email to my dad and put my phone face down because I am finally learning that not every ping is a hand grenade. E posted a photo of her kids at the river on Sunday, their hats crooked, a dog in the frame that looks like it would forgive anyone anything. There was no caption. My stepmom left a heart. My dad double-tapped and then texted me that he did because he didn't want me to think he was ignoring me. I typed that I am a grown man and he can use Instagram without asking permission, then deleted it and just sent a thumbs up. There are 2 new frames on the wall at the bottom of the stairs now, the Polaroid in its cheap one and the bowling alley picture my brother took of me and my father squinting into the cold. Between them hangs the hospital bracelet in a shadow box my grandmother insisted on buying like she could will good fortune into it with the money. I don't look at the date. I look at the scratch. I look at the way the ink held on anyway. I look at my name and his, and then I go upstairs and eat leftover lasagna in my socks with the TV on too loud, and when my dad calls to ask me if I can help him figure out his new router, I talk him through it while pacing in circles around my coffee table because that's what people do when they belong to each other. That's what's new. That's plenty.